I used to work night shifts as a security guard at a small manufacturing plant outside of town. It wasn't too massive, with just a few warehouses, an office building, and a parking lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. Most shifts went the same boring routine of sitting in the office, drinking coffee, doing some rounds, and trying not to fall asleep. One night in late fall, I was about halfway through my shift. It must have been around 1:30 or 2 a.m. I had just finished a walk around the perimeter and came back inside, and everything was normal. I sat down at the desk and checked my phone. I remember scrolling for a bit, maybe 5 minutes, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but I figured it could be something work-related. I answered, but it turned out to be the wrong number. I have no idea if this phone call had anything to do with what was going to happen next, but I figured I'd include it anyways. After a bit, I decided to do another round, so I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. I took a quick walk around the main warehouse, maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Then I headed back to the office. When I opened the door, I stopped. The lights were off, which was weird since they were motion censored on 30-minute timers. The room was dark, except for the faint glow from a monitor. I went inside, and the light turned back on after sensing my movement. Everything looked normal at first. My coffee was still there. My jacket was on the chair. Nothing moved. When I looked at the clock on the wall, I was dumbfounded. It was 5:17 a.m. That didn't make any sense. I checked my phone thinking the clock had broken, but my phone had the same time. I also had numerous missed calls on my cell phone. A lot of them, all from my supervisor, were asking where I was, why I wasn't answering, and if I had left my post. The first message was around 2:10 a.m. The last one was just a few minutes before 5 a.m. I called my supervisor back. He answered right away, sounding angry. He said they'd been trying to reach me for hours. Apparently, an alarm had gone off in one of the storage buildings, and when they checked the cameras, they saw me walk out of the office around 2 a.m. and just not come back. I told him I had only been gone for a few minutes, and I was trying to process what in the world was going on. Later that day, I asked to see the footage from the security cameras. At 2:03 a.m., I got up from the desk and walked outside. That part matched what I remembered. But then, I walk out of view from the first camera in a bit of a blind spot, and I'm not seen anywhere on any of the cameras for the next 3 hours. At 5:11 a.m., suddenly I appeared back in view of a camera, and it showed me doing my quick 5-minute rounds check in a warehouse. Then I walked back inside the office, and that's when I saw the time and all my missed phone calls. I don't remember any of those missing 3 hours of time or what happened at all. The only thing I can remember is my regular 5-minute walk around the facility. A couple years ago, I went to a concert in a city about 2 hours from where I live. I went with a friend, just the two of us, and we didn't drive back that same night because we were planning on drinking at the concert. We didn't know the area at all, but we figured it wouldn't matter since we could just use our phones to get around. The show ended late, close to midnight. By the time we got outside and away from the crowd, it was already pretty empty. We were both tired and just wanted to get back and sleep. I pulled up directions to the place where we were staying. I didn't realize until later that I had set it to public transit instead of walking, so it kept sending us down weird streets trying to connect routes that weren't even running anymore. We were both pretty drunk, and instead of switching the map to walking mode like I should have as soon as I noticed, we just kept walking thinking it would get us there soon. After maybe 15 minutes, things started to look wrong. There were no stores, no people, barely any cars, as there were now long blocks and streetlights for the most part. I stopped rechecking the route, and that's when I noticed someone standing across the street. I hadn't seen him walk up, and he must have been there already next to a bus stop sign, looking for directions. He made his way over to us, even though we were walking away from him. He caught up pretty quickly and walked a little ahead of us, then slowed down. He asked us if we were trying to find the station. I said no, we were heading somewhere else. He nodded like he understood, and then said, "You're going the long way." I said that was fine, and that we had directions. We kept walking, and he was alongside us, not close enough to where we felt too threatened, as there was a good 40 feet between us. He spoke up again and said that our phone was wrong, and the route we were taking would just loop us back here. I checked the map again, and I guess because I was tired or stressed, I couldn't really tell if it was right or not. It did look confusing though. My friend asked if he knew a better way. He said yeah, then pointed us down a side street saying that it was a shortcut and it would only take us 5 minutes. I didn't like the look of it as there were very few lights the way he pointed. I said we were fine and thanked him anyway. He didn't react for a second, and then he shrugged and said, "Suit yourselves." We started walking again, a little faster now to put distance between us and the man, who had gone back to just standing on the sidewalk. After a bit, I checked over my shoulder and he was gone. We kept going for another 10 minutes before I finally realized he was right about the route and we were going in a loop. At that point, I changed it to walking directions finally and it rerouted instantly. The new path didn't go anywhere near where the man had pointed us to go as a shortcut. It actually took us in the opposite direction. We followed it, and within a few minutes we were back near a main road with traffic and open places. From there, it was easy to get back. The next morning, I checked the map again out of curiosity. I traced the shortcut he had pointed us to and found out that it didn't connect to anything. It just ended after a short distance, right behind a row of closed buildings. No exits and no path through. It was essentially a dead end. I don't know what would have happened if we'd listened and gone that way. Like I said, we were drunk and already not thinking straight with the map's route, so it's a good thing we did not end up taking the shortcut. I don't think that dead-end street would have ended well for us. One night back in high school, I was out with friends, a completely normal night. The friend who was driving us drove all the time, and he knew his way around town perfectly, and so did the rest of us. Collectively, we had moved to different areas of town or changed schools throughout our lives, and we went to places almost every day at some point. That night, at almost midnight, we cruised around the basic neighborhoods, burning time until we had to be home. Suddenly, we got lost. Not just a turn onto the wrong street into a path, or cut into some random alleyway, but actually lost. We found ourselves on this suburban street that we had no idea existed before this. We recognized none of the houses or street signs or anything, which already didn't even make sense because we knew how to get anywhere and what the entire town looked like. We got to the end of the block thinking maybe we would recognize something, turn the corner, and be on our way. But from then on, it was this completely random neighborhood. The street we stuck to was kind of on a slope, so we were just driving down this little slope. There were no streetlights, and there was a very dim lamp on one of the curbs, and a few houses had decorative porch lights, but they were of no help. We could only see the sidewalk and the front of the houses when we were cruising right past them. The sky was pitch dark, and only the North Star and a couple stars in the distance. The blocks around this street didn't look familiar at all. The streets, including street names, were completely random, either streets we'd never heard of or streets with extremely generic names. The area didn't even fit the vibe of the town. It was almost like it was the design of a non-specific neighboring town with the same air as our town. We joked about being lost, but really we were laughing from being genuinely scared and screwed not knowing how to get home. This was well before cell phones were a thing, so we couldn't just Google Maps our way out of the scenario. You could have told us that we left town by accident, and I would believe it, even though it's extremely obvious when you leave my town, because it requires taking the highway on a very specific long road leading to towns that surround us. It would include going on one of the bridges that has multiple signs. Eventually, we somehow just ended up back in a location that we recognized, but it took probably about 45 minutes to an hour of being lost. Multiple times right after this happened, two of my friends and I, and even sometimes alone, we would go around town in the daytime and nighttime, taking various turns and streets, trying to uncover where we had gotten absolutely lost. I've tried again as an adult, but have never found it. I've never found any of the streets or the street lamps or even the same slope. Did we somehow leave town on a little path and we somehow didn't know, or was there something stranger going on? I'm an avid mountain walker and spend most weekends trekking in the mountains and hills of where I live in Europe. It was a hot Saturday afternoon about 4 summers ago now. I was doing one of my favorite walks, which was about 12 miles long. This area was mainly forestry, but the tracks themselves were gravel. There were no other walkers and only a few cyclists, which was kind of typical with it being so hot. So the first 10 miles were standard. I was at the bottom of a track that would eventually lead to the top of the valley. About 100 meters ahead, I could see a man walking in the same direction. He was tall, thin, and had short hair. He had some sort of limp, but I didn't think much of it, and he was actually walking quite fast, so I probably wouldn't have to overtake him. I carried on up the track. The sun was overhead and it was hot, but the man in front of me kept limping along and was making quick work of the incline. The track started to bend, and I lost sight of the limping man. The track comes up to a choice of two paths, one which leads to a small, often empty parking lot, and the other leads to the top of a valley. As I was about to head to the top of the valley, I heard a loud shout. It was coming from within the forest. I waited a second, and then heard another shout. This time the person was screaming, "No!" My first thought was that that guy must have tried taking a shortcut and had fallen over. As I made my way through the thick trees and ferns to see what was up, I stopped dead in my tracks. Up ahead through the trees, I could see the man who was limping ahead earlier. He was sitting down on a log with his head in his hands, and then screamed at the top of his lungs again. He then bolted up and started punching a tree. His face was bright red. He was raging. He then picked up a stick and started to bash it against a tree. I was frozen. I couldn't process what was going on. He just looked really mad. He shouted, "I hate you," and started stomping his feet. I quietly started to make my way back to the track, careful not to fall over or make any loud noises. That man was clearly a lunatic. I thought I would go on the more rarely used tracks towards the parking lot, and then take a shortcut north through the woods, as I figured that was the best way to avoid him. With every step, I became more confident and almost started to laugh about it. Maybe he wanted to let off a bit of steam or vent some anger. After all, the middle of the forest seems like a perfect place to do that, I suppose. As I looked back behind me, I could see the limping man about 25 meters away. He was wading through the brush, pushing branches and ferns aside, following after me. He had a strange snarl on his face, and his head was bobbing up and down between the brush. I couldn't believe what was happening. He must have seen me. There was no other explanation. I was only a mile away from a main road, so I started to speed up and walk a bit faster. I occasionally looked behind me and could see I was putting distance between us. I started to relax finally as I made it off the trail, and that was the last I saw of the man. I still don't know what to make of the situation, but the fact that he followed me through the brush was the most disturbing thing. I've done that same walk over a dozen times since, and I haven't seen him again. This happened when I was 21 years old. Back then, I believed that I made a rookie mistake, but have since learned my lesson and have taken precautions so that this doesn't happen again. I'm an avid mountain biker and have ridden trails for a while. It's good exercise, and I mostly like to just listen to music and pedal. I would never do time trials or anything like that. I would just keep track of my miles. I decided to go on a day ride at this one spot. I had been to this mountain before, but it wasn't one of my usual trails, so I wasn't super familiar with it. I was familiar enough with it though to where I would be okay going down the trails I had done in the past. Upon getting there, I was getting my pack ready when I met this girl who was doing the same. We started talking and hit it off pretty well. At the time, she honestly seemed like someone I could be friends with. She introduced me to her boyfriend, who was also a mountain biker. Once again, there were no red flags, and they were very friendly. They both seemed to be my age. They asked me if I wanted to take a ride with them down their favorite trail. I didn't see any harm in it, and I wanted to learn the area better for potential future rides. So the trail we did was one that I had never been on before. After biking down a portion of the mountain road, we stopped briefly to take a water break, and then I noticed that the girl had strategically left her backpack open. She had closed it, but then opened it back up a little bit. It seemed harmless then, but makes more sense now. Without any sort of warning, while I was taking a pee break in the trees, the two of them started laughing and took off. I was in a compromised position, so I had to hurry up and conclude my business to be able to catch them. By the time I made it back to my bike, they were both completely out of sight. Not to mention, both of my tires had been slashed, so I was stranded. I sat down for about 10 minutes and decided what I would do. I grabbed my bike and started walking down the trail. After about 15 minutes of walking, I came across a wire on the trail. It was tied onto two smaller trees. Had I been riding, that wire would have easily slit my throat, but the fact that they went through the trouble of slashing my tires made me question if they set up the wire for me or not. I hadn't seen them, so this wire may have not been them, or they could have potentially left it there to try to get another rider. I honestly don't know, and I don't think much about that part anymore. Regardless, I used my Swiss Army knife to remove the wire. I wasn't able to go any further down the trail, so I pushed my bike in the opposite direction that I came from, back up towards where I started. Close to 6 miles later, I made it back to my car. There was a bike rental shop nearby that I stopped at and asked them about the two. I gave them a description of them, but I wasn't able to identify them well enough. They offered to call the police, but after the day I had, I just wanted to go home. I do regret not having them called because over the years I had always wondered if they did this to anybody else. I've never been back to that trail. I'm still a mountain biker, but I quit going alone since then, and thankfully my husband is a fellow mountain biker. I had a hunting lease in a stretch of mountains a few hours from anywhere you'd call a town. The access road was barely a road, just 2 tire tracks cutting through brush and rock. There was an old cabin on the property that I didn't use at all or stay in. I would just do day hunting trips or sleep in my truck if I did go multiple days. It wasn't even a cabin, more like a one-room shack with a stove and a broken cot. Someone had used it years ago, maybe even decades ago. I went alone most weekends that fall. My trips would include no cell phone signal, no other hunters, no noise except wind, and whatever animals were out there. The only thing that was slightly off that I had ever noticed before my most recent trip was that the door to the shack would sometimes be wide open when I arrived. I would always close it if it was open, but the door didn't lock or have a latch, so I figured the wind or animals might force it open occasionally. The last time I went to this spot was late in the season. I hiked out before sunrise and set up along a narrow draw where I had seen tracks crossing a shallow creek. For a while, everything was normal. Birds calling, small animals moving through the brush, but at one point it must have gradually stopped. I didn't notice things quieting down, but now everything was quiet. I remember thinking that it felt like when the power goes out in a house, how everything suddenly feels wrong. I stayed longer than I should have. I kept expecting things to go back to normal, but they didn't. I started to feel like I was being watched. I climbed down and decided to head back early. It wasn't worth sitting up there any longer. The walk back uphill was slow going. I kept looking over my shoulder without really knowing why. About halfway up, I got that feeling again, stronger this time. I stopped and turned around. The light was fading slightly, but I noticed something standing in the trail below me. It wasn't human, and it looked as if it was a deer standing on its back legs, but it was also seemingly too tall to be a deer. I couldn't make any other details out other than that, but it seemed to be facing me, staring up the trail. I raised my rifle at first, ready to fire a shot, but decided against it. I kept going up the trail, nearly walking backwards, going as fast as I could without running. When I got back to the shack, the door was open again, and it had been closed when I had left hours prior. I got my gear in the truck and left as soon as possible. I never went back, and I let the lease run out.